Morning, everybody. All right, FHIR Work Group. Um, so let's go through that. We are like midway getting through all of the AU Base content. I'm going to start sharing my screen in a second. Let me find the share button. There it is. Okay. So here's our agenda for today. Um, Let me just make that a little bit bigger for people. That's probably big enough. Is that all right for people as a size?
Yep, it's
You can
good.
see it.
All right, cool. So we've got approval of previous minutes, a bit of updates and news. What was going to be Ricardo, but Ricardo has let me know that Uday will be presenting the AUPD PSS. And oh, Uday, have you
Mm-hmm.
attached that to this page yet?
No, I can't do that right now.
Yeah,
Uh,
that would be really good if you could just
sure,
attach it to this
I'll do that right
Confluence
now. Just
page.
give me
Yeah,
a minute.
awesome.
Yep.
And then after that, we're looking at some AFMM1 approval around the two of the new identifier data profiles, which is HSPO and HAE. I don't know why we have two JIRAs, but we do. Okay.
Sorry, it's my fault.
Um, no,
Yeah.
that's fine.
There are two
And
things.
oh, is Jane on the line? Do we have Jane already? Let me check.
That's been deferred.
Oh, that one
Jane,
was
let
being
us know. Yeah.
deferred.
Yep.
Okay, so all right. So we'll push that to the next meeting then, Brett. Is that the
Yes,
plan?
please. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
The clinical team just didn't have enough time to finalise.
Okay, no worries. All right, so we'll push item 5 to the next meeting. Then we're continuing to go through the medication request guidance. Do we have Heath on the line? Not yet. Okay, we'll find out. By the time we get to it, we might have to delay. That's fine. Um, all right. And then we may finally get to talk about family member history,
It's
Brett,
like it.
which I know has been on the agenda many times, but we never end up getting to it. So, who knows? Maybe we will today. Um, Let me have a look. What else? And then it's next meeting plans. So I'll need to double check them with people on the line. Are there any changes you want to make to this besides the ones that we already talked about? So are there any other items that you want to add to this, or anything that I'd already called out that you would like to actually push to a later meeting? Okay. I'm not hearing any. I'm not seeing any hands up. So let's go forwards. All right. So, first part is our usual business. So, let's get to the meeting minutes from our last call. So, running through this, um, we've got like attendees there. We've got a bunch of slides. Actually, was that last call? 36? Yes, it was. Okay. Um, we've got the recording associated with that, and then we've got okay. This kind of content. Uh, all right. Running through this, just showing that to what we have on the screen, uh, about what was discussed and what was voted on. hmm Okay. Does anyone have any additional feedback or changes they would like to make to this? Not hearing any. As chair, I am therefore allowed to say I have additional feedback that I would like to have included. Um, that I would like it to be clearer in the minutes what the actual proposed change that was voted on was. I know this says like add new codes, but I am particularly unclear when I read these minutes on what the specific normative proposal was, or if this was an in principle discussion. I've already raised this with Brett. I've seen some improvements with that, but I would like to see some further editorial adjustments, please.
Yeah, I'll summarize that. They're in the tickets. I'll just make sure they state all of the parts.
Mhm.
So it
I
could say the motion is to pass them as described in
Mhm.
the juror issue. Would that do?
I don't know. Jury issues change over time. So what I would
Yeah. Oh,
find more appropriate and what I've seen done in AU Core is that we actually have like a proposed there's like a bullet point that says proposed change that actually has like the almost like the copy paste from the JIRA at the time that we voted on,
cool.
because the JIRA content can change over time.
Yeah, that's good. I'll do something like that for those tickets.
And I think that's all that for me that I was missing, because I found this, I think it was yesterday when we were going to the AU core meeting around endpoint, and I, for the life of me, could not actually tell what the AU base agreement had been, like in terms of like a normative content thing. And there wasn't a JIRA linked at the time, so I was very unclear on that. And so, anyway, that's where my request is coming from, so that we have this capability to search that across the meeting minutes.
Cool. I'll bullet point those out properly.
Sounds great. Otherwise, I think this is complete. Does anyone else have any other feedback or suggestions for the meeting minutes? So could we then take that in an in principle position that that's an editorial improvement of the meeting minutes, and we could otherwise improve approve them?
Sounds reasonable, Daniel.
Good.
All right, so who would be happy to, understanding that there is an action to add in the specifics, the normative specifics of the different decisions, who is happy to motion approval of these minutes?
Sure, I will, Dad McKillop.
Thanks, David. Who's happy to second?
I'll second. Michael.
All right, I'm just going to pop to find the poll. Any other questions or comments while I'm doing that? Alrighty, I've launched the poll. Please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain. Please, everybody vote. If you have dialed in and you don't have access to the electronic poll, you can just say your name. If you can see the poll but it won't let you vote, if you could just pop that in the chat, whether you are +1, affirmative, negative, or abstain. And I'm going to count that down since we have over 80% participated in a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will end that poll. I will share the results. So, with the 2 votes in the chat, we have 10 affirmative, 0 negative, 5 abstain. So the motion carries. We've approved the minutes. All right, let's get back to our agenda, which I think is this one. Yes, this is the one. Okay, next, updates and news. Right. Brett, do you have anything you want to share with us?
Actually, not really this week. The TSC is continuing. We've got a meeting on Thursday. Yeah, so we're working through some of the document content and process content on the website. But yeah, that's probably the only thing that's happened.
So can I just check in on that? Because I've missed a few because I've been doing, the overseas international stuff.
Yep.
I think there'd been a discussion around formalizing between the TSC and the FHIR Work Group the different responsibilities, and that might change the FHIR Work Group charter. Has that been discussed, and do we have a timeline on when that might come back through the FHIR Work Group to discuss and approve?
No, we have not yet discussed that. I may try and get that on this week's call because we haven't got any planned other actions. So it might be good to have that discussion to say, yeah, try and work out when 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 we can have a position in the TSC, that is, and come back to the work group. Yeah, but no plans as such yet.
Okay. Are there any other updates and news that people on the line would like to raise here and just let people know about? Silence. Okay. I will say that and we should update, Brett, the calendar. We know the dates of the next HL7AU Connectathon. The tickets aren't available, but we do know the dates. It's in Brisbane. It's the 25th, 26th, isn't it, of August? Need to double check that, but we should like post that on the calendar so that people can be
Yeah,
aware.
yeah, that's good. I'll confirm those dates, but I think you're right.
Danielle, I thought there was a connectathon at the end of July in Brisbane, and then there was what was more a hackathon at the end of August. And I know that one hasn't had any. The registrations for the other one have been sent out, and I think they closed last Friday. But this one is a different one, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So there's two. There's a Spark. Well, actually, there's so many events. So there's in July, which is the 8th of July, a sparked testing event, which
Right.
is focused also on like a set of connected testing scenarios that will also include like provider directory and so forth. That's going to be in Brisbane. That's a one-day event. That's 8th of July. The HL7AU Connectathon, which is a bit broader and also includes things like around breakouts and tutorials and a whole bunch of other things. That's the next one is also in Brisbane, and that is in August, and I believe it's 25th, 26th. And we should update the AU FHIR Work Group calendar to make sure that that's there so people know. Whenever the Eventbrite tickets come out for that one. And the so for the Spark testing event, the registration is closed and it's full. But it's a much smaller event, so it's really only looking at very focused testing and development. And I think if we've allowed like 50 spots for that, so that's full right now. Um, Whereas the connectathon, I think, will sit at like the 100 and something people and will also incorporate a bunch of observers and maybe from government and policy and clinicians and so forth to contribute to some of the conversations that also happen while we're doing connecting actions.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. Thanks for clarifying.
Danielle, those dates are correct, 25, 26.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. Oh, do we know when the tickets on Eventbrite are coming out? Is that like soonish or we're not sure?
Yeah, soonish.
Soonish. Okay. No worries. So we should also think about in the firework group if there are any particular breakouts that we want to run. And I guess that will also be something that the rest of the work groups will need to consider.
Yeah, that would be really good. I think it was really successful last time, that identifier type 6 discussion, and we made a lot of progress in the one session. So yeah, if there's other difficult topics, it's good to do.
Alrighty. So, um, otherwise, in terms of updates and news, I don't have any. So if nobody else has any, we can move to the next one, which will be Uday. Um, do you want to share your screen, Uday?
Sure, definitely.
Okay, let me just
Yep.
stop sharing so that you can. Please go ahead.
All right. Sure. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. Oh, thank you. So a project scope statement by the way, my name is Uday. I'm from Australian Digital Health Agency, working in the informatics team there with Ricardo. So we want to propose this project scope statement for HL7AU PD, FHIR-IG in HL7AU repositories. to derive from AU core and make it interoperable with with AU core and make it up to date so that it's deriving from most up to date profiles in AU core and AU base respectively. So as part of that, we want to update or organization, practitioner roles, location, healthcare service, and so on, and potentially endpoint from AU core. Obviously, there's some work which is pending on endpoint to do with AU base and AU core. We also proposed a draft AU endpoint, AU base endpoint profile, which is sitting as a pull request and will be absorbed once it's reviewed and tested and so on. After that, we also will propose a AU core endpoint, which will be derived from AU base, which will make a good foundation for AU directory and the agency's Health Connect provider directory, IG as well, end of the day. We observed that only NHSD provider directory is deriving from AU the AU PD. So we also communicated that to them that there will be under 5 probably breaking changes which will be evolved from deriving from AU core. We did that analysis just recently and provide that feedback to NHSD as well. As a whole, the deriving from AU core, it's possible, and it will be good for downstream FHIR implementation guides as well. So this is a project scope, and as you can see, probably some of the breaking changes probably will be with the terminology URLs, and we might need to support the AU core actors as well in the HL7 AU PD and so on. Basically, the points that we want to discuss in this working group is this. Who will be the project facilitator, for example, who will be the IG facilitator, and so on. As of now, agency is taking initiative of doing all the heavy lifting, like updating the IG and taking it to the community feedback and so on. However, saying that, we have other roles as well. As Daniel, I have a question there.
So we can't approve where you've got TBCs. So this would be a socialization exercise, but we can't, in principle, this work group could not approve the PSS while we've got like TBCs open. Is that your expectation? Just want to confirm that.
Yeah, we just want to see if we can get some names on it so that we can start the work, basically.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, okay, no worries. So please keep going. Sorry for interrupting there. Yep.
No, that's okay. So we just want to get some names so that we can carry forward the piece of work and provide a draft implementation guide for community consultation. Yeah, so basically, project facilitator, obviously, it will be the agency will all facilitate all the work needed to update the FHIR implementation guide. And we are looking for who will be the publishing facilitator, for example, from this group. Yeah.
So the publishing facilitator, I think, can be defined, which is Brett, with his HL7AU hat on. At the moment, for all HL7AU specs that go through ballot,
Hmm.
Brett is the publishing facilitator. Um, for your Fire ID facilitator, what you are filling out is who is your like primary ID person who's going to be doing the work.
Hmm.
Um,
Which which is us basically, which is me or anybody from the
Oh, there
team.
you
Yeah.
go. Pop your name in.
Yeah.
For project facilitator, that's more project level. It could be exactly the same actually as the Fire ID facilitator, but so for example, maybe AU Core, I'm the project facilitator and Dushi is the Fire ID facilitator.
Hmm.
So I guess that really depends on how you're planning to organize
Hmm.
that work.
Yes. Yeah. Well, somebody from the team will be taking the hat on for that from the agency. Yeah. That's good. Vocabulary facilitator
So that is, it's more like identifying a point of contact for um, any of the terminology things. In practice, I don't actually think that necessarily translates to a whole bunch of the questions, but I mean, so obviously for Sparked, Michael Osborne is the vocabulary facilitator um, for our
mhm,
projects. Um, and there may be someone on the agency side that you want to nominate as the vocabulary facilitator. Because it's that
mhm,
facilitation, it's saying like if we're going to be doing terminology, who is the
sure.
person who is going to be working through this? And
Mhm,
it's just nominating a set of names. And part of that gives HL7AU the confidence that you have a resourced project that can do the work. So
mhm,
it's just sticking names next to things, basically.
sure.
Yeah, so Danielle, what you said is aligned with what I thought, and I had discussions with you there about it. So the bottom line is that I've suggested that 807AU and Brett is one of the key person, be the publishing facilitators, the others, the agency, as you they say, is doing the heavy duty or heavy lifting. So we are happy to fill the names. The question is whether or not there are any other members of the community who feel passionate enough or want to
Mm,
step up, like say, for example, the
Okay.
vocabulary facilitator. We do have members from the agency who is attending the HL7AU terminology working group, and we can sort of discuss and sort of put the name forward. But I think the exercise that we're doing today is to see that apart from the publishing facilitator, which we do agree that is going to be Brett, and apart from the caveat that the agency will be doing all the heavy lifting, are there any other members of the community who feel strong and passionate enough to be wanting to step forward, like say, for example, as a vocabulary facilitator? But we understand that project facilitator, fire IT facilitator, and even the modeling facilitator will come from the agency. But we are not wedded to the idea that it has to be anyone that comes from the agency. Make
I mean,
sense?
fair. It does. It could be more open, and that is on. I mean, even though it hasn't been named here, I guess that's on the project facilitator to pull together the team that's actually going to do the work. Whether that's through like open calls through Zulip, and this is also a reasonable forum. So at that point, maybe that's actually appropriate to go. Would you like to do a call out in this meeting to ask who would like to fulfill one of these roles?
We can do it
Yep.
here. We can do it on Zulip. It's a question of what this group feels comfortable about.
mm,
Okay. Um, and if that's open about certain items, then I don't think that's I mean, that's not against governance. That's totally appropriate. So we absolutely could support that as a, and by we there, I mean the FHIR Work Group could support through different communication channels the requests that are being put out around that.
Right. So, I mean, as I said, I mean, I'm now sort of like not speaking with my co-chair head on. I'm speaking as one member of the agency. The question is, so this group, the leadership and the members at large, what is the most comfortable way moving forward? Do we want some names to be put forward now, or do we want it to go to Sulu?
So before other people speak, I'll just make a comment. It sounds like that FHIR, like the project facilitator, FHIR ID facilitator, publishing facilitator are done deals,
Yeah.
right? So are you requesting a community vocab facilitator, or is that something that the agency would like to propose?
We are not requesting a community facilitator. We are opening up to community suggestion as to whether or not anyone from the community feels strong enough to step into that role. And as I said earlier, even the modeling facilitator, because we are doing the IG development, so therefore it's probably very reasonable that the agency would put some name in there as under that box, within that box. So the question is whether or not anyone in the community or at this meeting feels strong enough to be wanting to be a vocabulary facilitator.
Okay. Um,
Is Michael Osborne here?
I am
Michael
here,
Osborne
but
is
I
online.
think. Oh,
Sorry to put you on the spot. I'm just
that's okay.
because Daniel mentioned you earlier.
No, so I'll just wait this one out. I think it'd be good if the agency could put a vocab facilitator into it. It's largely a work that you're responsible for at the moment. So I think happy for you to take that role.
Sure, yeah, I think we are happy to do that. It's just that we want it to be an open process and not to be sort of seen as a kind of agency show in doing everything, that kind of thing. So we'll come back with the names and including the publishing facilitator as Brett. I assume, Brett, you're not opposing to that?
Nope, that's one of my HSO and AU jobs. So that's fine.
Okay, cool. All right. All right. So
Thanks,
thank you.
Michael. Thanks.
Back
Thank
to
you.
you, Uday.
Thanks, Stephen. Yep, that's clear as that. Obviously, yeah, we got a vocabulary specific facilitator from agency. Modeling facilitator as well, I believe. We will nominate from agency unless anybody from the team would want to chip in.
And we
Yeah.
also have Richard with his hand up. Go for it, Richard.
Oh, Richard, sorry.
There's the mic. I just looking at the TBCs next to supporting organisations. I'm not sure they need filling in.
They do. Either they need to be filled in or they need to be removed. Like we cannot approve a TBC. The intention
That's
that's
true. That's
presented.
true. But what
Yeah.
I'm thinking is to the right of where it says supporting organisations, HL7 Australia. What would go in the right-hand column there? Would that be the name of a contact person at HL7 Australia, or is it doesn't need anything in the right-hand column?
I think from Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, from the HL7 AU practice, but internationally, we do have the concept of sponsors and co-sponsors, and then what will be put in there is yes or no, that kind of thing. So we now have a bunch of name here as the supporting organization. What we are looking for is an indication of yes or no. And if
You would typically put a person. Although, I mean, I think the person is often like, you know, on a path report where you've got a signing pathologist. Yeah, it's a very high level thing. But Brett, could you provide comment on that?
I don't think you need a person, but yeah, we need to know that these are actual participating organisations that are going to participate in the project, right? This is what we have to have on this list. Um, it would be good to go back to some of the original participants on the PD spec early versions, like HealthLink and Medical Objects, and
We're happy
anyone
to
left in the SMD space.
Telstra also happy to participate.
Yeah, Telstra Health, for sure. Excellent. Yeah, because I think they have implementations of some of the original specs, and so should be at least across that this is happening. Yeah, and I think they would be good participants as well because they have some background knowledge as well about the original.
Sure.
Thanks, Jay.
I'll update the list as well.
Well, I mean, you need to chase them and say
Hmm.
who can actually support this directly.
Yeah, we will chase. I mean, for HL7A, we'll contact you, Brett. But we will chase after the others.
Well, we are by default because it's an HL7 Australia project. So if it gets approved by TSC, we are involved.
Okay, that's fine then. Look, I
Yeah.
will chase after the others to sort of get a yes and no. But the question that I have is that do we need a person name sort of against it, or is just a
I
yes
don't
and no like the international practice?
I don't think we've done that before. Had
Yeah,
people, yeah,
so
yeah,
that's what I expect, that it was just like
yeah.
going on
Uh,
with the international practice is just a question of yes or no to confirm that that will happen. And with regarding to implementers, do you want them to be in the other interested party and with calling out the role as implementers?
yeah, that's like, I guess, if you're more passive and not,
Okay,
yeah,
so in that
yeah,
case, then.
or it's impacting some other group, right?
Okay, so
That should be interested.
based on your suggestions, so we'll contact sort of a few potential implementers and then get them to say yes or no.
Yeah, I think it's just a practical. We need a decision-making capacity that's not just the agency.
Okay.
So that's the main, it's got to be a project. Like if we decide, like this is a logistics question too, are you going to have separate project meetings for this project, right? And things like
In
that.
principle, I disagree
Yeah,
with what you're talking about in those fields. Supporting organisation in terms of PSS is meant to indicate that there is enough actual community interest to do this
yeah,
work. So the list of organizations and supporting organization is something that those organizations, if we contacted them, would say, yes, I am actually interested in and will participate in provider directory work. So it's that perspective that allows this group and HL7AU to make a determination amongst our priorities that this has sufficient community interest to proceed.
So from the project perspective, I'm talking about international based on my experience. So the project team will be doing the heavy duty work. The supporting organizations, aka sponsors and co-sponsors, will be providing the um, technical and also domain inputs, not necessarily involving in any of the work or development per se. Is this the understanding here with regarding to supporting organization?
yeah. 'Cause, I mean, these are the people that will have to implement it or use it, right? So they are the decision-making capacity to make sure the spec is fine. Who actually does the work? Yeah,
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
well, it's whatever.
Then that's
But
clear.
yeah,
So yeah. So we'll
yeah.
follow up with those organizations to get their take of approval in the involvement, and we'll also ping some implementers. And Brett, if you can provide some name to Uday for him to start with, that would be wonderful.
Sure.
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you.
All right, let's
So
run
Uday
through the rest of
for.
it
Yep.
quickly, just to
Yep. Sure.
confirm any of the other actions that need to be undertaken before this can come back and then be approved.
Yep. So the
Okay.
action number one is the agency will fill in the names. Sorry, Uday, if you can scroll back up a bit.
Yep.
fill in the name in the project team, and
Yes.
Sure.
then
I'll
the
do it offline.
agency,
Don't worry.
yeah, the agency would also take the action of contacting the supporting organization to get a yay and nay, and then the agency would also, with Brett providing some suggestions, will contact implementers and to get their support.
Yep.
hmm
Sure.
You're developing
And the
organization.
last one
I don't
is
think you have to
developing.
do
Yep.
more than you
Yeah,
have.
I think the developing
Like you're doing the
organization is
work.
yeah,
That's fine.
It's
yeah.
fine.
I think the TBC
Yeah.
can be taken out.
Sure.
hmm
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as somebody's there volunteering to do it, that's
Yeah.
good.
Although,
External drivers is fine. Dependencies, I would recommend that you follow from the PSSs of the other ones like EREC, like Core, etc., that have like an in brackets or like latest balloted version, unless
Mhm.
you are trying to fix it to a very specific version, even if a later version is published. So we've got a bit of wording in the other PSSs that I think you just want to borrow.
Sure. Not a problem. I'll do that. Yep.
yeah, and also the AU base, we probably need to put the endpoints in there to be more specific as well.
Mm,
That would work
sure.
better.
Yep. I think
Okay.
ballot time frames is
Yeah.
going to add it later, I believe.
Do you have an idea?
Is that
Some kind of
August next
target?
year? Yeah,
We
like
Yeah.
we do need
Yeah.
to know that to approve.
Yeah, so
oh
the time frame, Uday and I had
yep.
also discussed. So we're looking at about sort of this is a rough estimate, sort of 5 week of development work, and then a period of time for community consultation, and then sort of addressing community consultation feedback, and then going into the first informative ballot, and then the second working standard ballot. So that's the kind of trajectory that we're talking about. So the time frame for the balloting, the two ballot cycle will be depending on sort of like the AU balloting cycle.
So in that case, and I know Jamie, you've got your hand up. If you're going to go ballot for comment, which I actually think is a good idea, and then go ballot for working standard,
Yeah.
so your best opportunity for ballot for comment is, given where we are,
Mm-hmm.
Feb. It's the Feb March ballot cycle next year, and then go the ballot for working standard next year. Like that's your
Right.
quickest path, I think.
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons why we want to take it here. So therefore, we get an understanding, an agreement from this group as to sort of when will be the best timing for the first sort of public comment ballot. If February, March next year is the one, then we'll work backward sort of to fill in all the other dates. So
Okay.
can you take
Sure.
note of that, and then
Mm,
we'll work backward. We'll put in the details in here, and then we'll present a complete PSS next time when we come back to here.
sure.
Sorry, Jamie, I did see your hand up, but I need to say something
No, no,
before.
Go,
all
Jamie.
good. It was a
What's
different train of
happening?
thought anyway. Just the title of the spec. So it's referenced in here as PD2. Danielle, this might have been what you're referring to in the chat as well, but
Yeah.
is this referring to like PD release 2, or is it going to be titled PD2? It just seems strange to pin it to a release version.
So can we take an action, Uday?
hmm
Just send that through to, I guess, maybe the co-chairs.
hmm
We'll just give you a like an editorial review on just a couple of things to clean up in
Sure.
the
Not a
form.
problem. Do that.
Awesome.
Okay.
Brett?
Just on the scope
Oh, yes.
wording, just a bit about incorporation of inherited AU core must support obligations with AU core actors. Are you
Can I
saying
just
there
double
will
check
be
though, given
AU PD
timing,
Mm.
actors? Yeah,
Brett, do we need to
yeah,
do this now, or can this
Uh,
be part of where Uday sends that and we provide some feedback and we can also do some offline content?
yeah. That's fine by me. Cool.
yeah. I can
Yeah.
email the co-chairs and we can go from there. That's about it. Thanks very much to everyone to contribute to that. All right, I'll cross over to the next agenda item, which is on me as well, which is about the moving HSPO and HAE identifier data type profiles to AFMM1, which is like more than draft, more than draft. Basically, these are the Jira tickets for that, and the identifier data type profiles, which
Hang on, go back to the Jira ticket.
Sorry.
Go back to the Jira ticket.
Yep. Not much info there. I'm sorry.
No, there's a problem in terms of governance. That says submitted. It does not actually record an approved decision, nor does it record actually record that it's in the spec. We cannot approve FMM1 if we do not have this in play. Have we done these?
Yeah. They've been merged because we agreed to do a draft zero inclusion.
And okay, we shouldn't
Yeah,
have.
no.
Like
Yeah,
like a
no,
Jira
but
ticket
no,
that's submitted, we should not have merged into master a PR because
no.
we've not put it into the right state.
There's no content. All the PR, all the change, we agreed to put a draft zero into the current build. So this is to move it to complete.
Submitted. There's no recorded actual decision here.
No. All there's previous tickets, which were all the changes that we made, and we did a discussion. So we were in draft. We had a draft version already included for a number of weeks.
Okay, so we have all of that in the changed log, and this is just the.
Yeah, this is the approval to say
Okay.
we believe all the work is finished to say that we can approve it for inclusion, which means we'll go to ballot.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, okay.
That's all we're doing. So we kept the draft work tickets all separate, and now we're just kind of going, we think we've done all the things that need changing at this stage.
Okay. Apologies, Uday. I was concerned about seeing a ticket at submitted level for what would be an AFMM1 decision.
That's okay. Thank you. So that's the profile which is already having that HSPO fixed value to HSPO for the identified type value, and the other ticket is to do with the same moving the HAE data type identifier to AFMM1 as well.
Yeah. And I mean, those were the terminology things were the last changes done, but Richard presented them all the original drafts and stuff as well. So it's, I think we've discussed that all the changes required were applied, the identifier type issues were fixed with terminology. So I think we're kind of ready. We think that's complete now and correct. So I think, so it's really just a request to take it to FMM1, which means it doesn't, I mean, you can still change it down the track if you have issues, but
the requirement is looking at QA.html. So you need to demonstrate that for us to vote on this. So please demonstrate the QA.html of these two profiles.
Yeah, so we just gotta, cool.
It's 2 errors, which are to do with terminology, I believe.
That's the other ones.
Medication administration.
So there's no errors.
Yeah.
Are there any warnings? Because they also need to be considered for the two profiles.
Yeah.
So I for those people on the line who've not been part of an AFMM discussion before,
no warnings.
the criteria to move from a draft, which is like initial we have something, to this is a published thing that potentially we could ballot. The main criteria, in fact, there's 2 of them. One is we believe that we have made that the description of the content is substantially complete. And the other is that there are no errors or warnings that are in place. There's a caveat there around the errors and warnings that we can approve. I've lost the word. I'm still jet lagged.
Pull requests.
No, it's the thing around where we acknowledge a set of tooling generated errors or
Yeah.
warnings that we do not believe are actually substantively about the artifact in place. So
There.
we need to
Yeah, Richard's put in.
accept that any of the errors or warnings related to those structures are actually not about the structure and more about like tooling or something else. So,
Yeah.
and so it's those two criteria that we have to like confirm in order to vote AFMM1.
Cool. Yeah, so these ones are clean. There's no warnings or
No
errors.
warnings, no errors. Great.
Yeah.
That's ticked off.
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks very much. That's about it, I believe. I've taken my 35
So let's
minutes.
show the
Sure.
first one. Sorry,
Yep.
coming back to it. Any final outstanding comments around what are we looking at? We're looking at HSPO. Are we happy? Could you make that actually slightly bigger? Just like one
Sure.
more zoom. Yep, cool.
I got one.
Oh,
I got a problem. I got a problem now.
okay. Go.
There's no example codes.
I don't know what that means. Example codes. What do you mean by that?
So that's not actually an example of the value, identifier value.
You mean in
It's in the
the
different.
diff view?
Or not at all. Yeah, we have no, like, we don't have any example values.
Will it be captured
I
in
know
the
we
example as itself, Brett, or like
actually that might be,
13?
actually, can we eyeball that? Because I didn't think of that.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Do you have, oh no, can we go to,
Do you want me to go to the
um,
example of
No, hang on,
yeah,
organization?
no,
the
no.
example, yeah, yeah,
On the identifier, scroll up the text. There's a stu note, and there's a note there
Mhm.
about example
yeah,
values.
yeah. So we're still waiting because Services Australia would have to supply that, right?
Yeah.
So I
Where
guess the
are we on
question
that? Do we have an
is,
update?
yeah, I don't know if that's a problem or a, we know that it will come and,
Have
but we
they,
kind of want it before ballot. Yeah.
sorry, has Services Australia, okay, hang on. How do I want to form this? Has Services Australia committed to providing a test arc for this?
Um, Richard, do we have any? Do
I
you have
have
any
not
intent on that?
spoken to the people at the agency who are
Okay.
talking with Services Australia since I came back from leave. 2.5 months ago, the people at the agency committed to discuss this with Services Australia, and Services Australia people expressed interest in doing this work, but I don't know what's happened since then.
Okay.
Yeah, we just like we need one of each, right? That we can use as an example safely. I
Yes, we
imagine
do need.
they'll need to
Yeah,
do they'll need to
yes,
do
we
a
do need it.
bigger HI testing framework, but like we don't need that. We just need a safe example.
Yeah. I agree we need the examples. There is a process underway. It may have ground to a halt. It may have produced something which hasn't made its way to Uday.
Okay.
I guess the thing is, do we go to one AFMM1 in anticipation of getting an example, or do we leave it at 0 until we've got the examples?
I'll open that up for comment, and then at the rest of that, I will provide my comments in some chat. Would people like to comment on that question that Richard has asked?
Oh, I mean, I don't want to go to ballot without an example. We can't like I don't think we should go to ballot without a without an example. So the question is it coming and when's it coming? Because I don't think we've got a mechanism to not publish it because the thing we were expecting didn't turn up. Once it's FMM1, it goes to ballot, right?
So
So it's kind of,
if
yeah.
Okay, so if AFMM1 says ballot ready, and this doesn't have an example value because they don't exist, they haven't been allocated, then I guess it's not ballot ready.
So do we just hold?
Yeah.
I mean, we know what we're waiting for.
Open
I think,
conversation.
yeah, yeah.
Sure.
Oh,
We'll follow up with the Service Australia. I believe they should be, and yep, and we'll put a pull request and get a motion going for the example, and we'll update this
That's good. Go
example.
hassle them.
Yep.
Go and hassle them for a couple of
Sure.
weeks and see where we are next week.
so are we essentially suggesting deferring this item to a later meeting for AFMM1 to understand the outcome from the discussion with Services Australia?
I think so.
You've conveniently gone on mute, Brett, but I feel like this is what you were suggesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh,
Okay.
are there any other comments or questions around these two items?
Can I just confirm that they both don't have an example, right? That's
You don't.
Yep.
yeah.
They
So
both don't have
is the
example.
action for the agency to uh, discuss with Services Australia and bring back to the next meeting like a clearer position on that, including a clearer position that might even be like they're not going to define a test arc. Maybe they won't. We don't know that.
True.
Okay, if we're happy to do that, then let's agree that that is what the outcome, I guess, from this meeting. So
Yep.
they're not yet AFMM1, and we can relook at that at the next call based on the outcomes of the updates from the agency talking with Services Australia.
Sure.
Okay.
I think that'll do. Yep. Brett, there is one pull request which is waiting in HLS and AU Base to move to absorb that
Sorry.
HAE identifier as well. So that,
Yeah. I'll go check that. I must have missed that one. Sorry.
Yeah.
So next is Heath. Now, Heath, would you like to share your screen, or do you want me to have a go at it?
No, nothing to share actually. So basically I just have a couple of actions which to report on. So from the 6th, I had an action to create some Zilla polls around the use of status and intent. So I've just put those polls out literally in the last few minutes. Can give you links to those in the chat. There is a third action. Well, just once I get feedback from those polls, I'll probably have some time in the next 2 weeks session, if that's okay, to address these further. The third action was to provide a proposal for a extension around the number of times already dispensed to be used in a medication request. In the case of a repeat authorization, I have not done that yet, so I will work on that again for the next meeting.
Heath, we had some sidebar conversation at the Brisbane meeting. So I have put forward our suggestions to HL7 International Pharmacy. I didn't receive any pushback from the proposal of repurposing the medication request resource or profile to support repeat authorization and the suggestion of using the medication request of intent and the and the value has also sort of not been pushed back or accepted by HL7 International per se. I paused the conversation about the extension element because you said that we are still to discuss what name and how we're going to use it. So I'll wait for that to settle before I bring it forward to the HL7 International Pharmacy Work Group. So unless there are surprises about the medication request stop intent value that we propose, then I don't think that I will need to go back to HL7 International for that. But the extension that element that we are going to confirm would need to wait until we have a decision before I take forward to HL7 International.
Yeah, so that's good news. Thank you for doing that, Stephen. But yeah, I think we can go into more details when we address these in the next meeting. So thank you.
Yeah, so we had a meeting yesterday, sort of 6 a.m. our time. So I have given the international group an update. So I'll say that we're waiting for the Australian discussions to finalize the extension element, and then we'll go back to HSF International for that. So there is the good thing about that is that there may be a possibility for our extensions to be included in the international extension pack rather than just being an Australian extension. So we'll work on that.
That also sounds good. Thank you.
All right, thanks both. So we will move across those three JIRAs to the next meeting. And go from there. And there's the Zulip polls that Heath has posted, and I think that we should send those out from a FHIR Work Group perspective to let people know. Given that these are medication requests, I would suspect that we actually want to send those also through AU Core. Is there an AU Core co-chair on the line? I'm just looking through it.
Landon's on the call.
Landon's
I'm
on the
on the
call.
line.
Great. Landon,
Yes.
are you happy to take that through the AU Core Work Group?
Yes, that sounds good.
Excellent.
Do that.
All right, so that brings us to what is, the thing that has been on the agenda again and again and again and again, and I won't hold it up any longer. Brett, family member history, go for it.
It's going to be a massive anticlimax. Can I just request anyone to start one screen today? So could you watch the hands if anyone has a
Yeah, no
comment?
worries.
Cool. So I might just share this guy. Shall I share my whole screen? Cool. So hopefully you can see like a tree diagram kind of thing there. Mind map.
Not yet. Oh, yes, now for me.
Cool. So whilst we are not intimately connected to the AUCDI work in the FHIR Work Group, this is some of the modelling that's been done around family history content. So, and mainly that's just to note that's in discussion currently with the CDG group for the clinical group as part of their work. So there's a reference there to one of the online meetings where they kind of did an introduction to this kind of material. But yeah, what we're looking at is the family member history resource, which is essentially a way for individual related family members to be linked to a patient and have the family members' medical history included as part of the representation of as kind of related person clinical content. So that's super useful for things like some of the preventative care pathways, And it's a yeah that's pretty really common in things like the RACGP Red Book Preventive Care Guidelines. It puts you into different risk classifications as part of those pathways, and yeah, you can do things like testing and things related to that. It's also good for genetic kind of disease uh, management as well. Um, so yeah, initially, like this is a ticket. I think before we were even using Jira, this ticket was raised, and then we transferred it across into Jira as part of a request to add a profile on this, and the um, that was deferred through a ballot some many years ago, and has sat deferred for since then. So I think I pretty much like to set a baseline of really just related to the terminology binding that would be appropriate to use with this resource. So it would be adding a resource, adding a profile on for AU Base. So an AU Base family member history, and then looking at a couple of the key terminology bindings. And that would be pretty much it for AU Base. Um, so just to look at, I'll start off perhaps with the resource itself. Uh, yeah, just pop up if there's any questions. Um, so primarily, the idea is that you can um, have a patient that's known, define a relationship to another person, and then uh, describe the um, maybe describe conditions that the related person has or has suffered from, and it extends out to things like outcomes and other things as well, and the ability to put notes and things. So primarily, I'm really only interested in describing at this stage, having some bounds on the relationship coding to be able to say how the patient is related to this other person, and then also the problem diagnosis entry. So these, yeah, these are um, qu already quite well defined value sets. There's a family member value set um, which is one of the international um, descriptions of how to describe a relationship to a family member. And we also have for clinical conditions, that's very much related to things that we already use in regular condition coding that we do for individuals anyway. So pretty much the idea is to look at doing those bindings. So moving from um, moving from this example binding um, into a another specific binding for Australian use. So the proposal really is to look at setting that binding. We might talk about the binding strength separately, but what we're referring to is actually I might go backwards. What we're referring to is an existing um, value set defined in the terminology THO terminology package. So we're not defining anything new. It's using an HL7 value set. Um, so one thing to consider is maybe SNOMED, but I can give you some reasons why not. Danielle.
Why why would we not use the value set that's been linked to patient relationship and related person relationship,
Yeah.
which has basically taken what is the HL7 value set
Yep.
across those resources, and it's also in family member history, and added in a couple of additional relationships that have been deemed culturally appropriate for Australia. So I'm unclear on why we wouldn't use that. Although I guess perhaps there's a
Yeah.
genetic proponent to that, and maybe the cultural relationships we've included are
Yeah.
in no way like a trigger for that sort of thing. But yeah, like, could you comment on that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's how the HSO International, that family member value set is actually a subset of that, of a bigger set, which includes other kinds of related parties. Um, so yeah, because I think like this is straight. This is the one for a related person, and I think yeah, we're kind of it's a so mainly I think so the definition. Let me get that right. Relationship type. Yeah, so that's the HSO that's HSO International's value set. That's in NCTS. And I
I
believe
guess that
that, yeah,
I guess some of the values that you want in the
yeah,
relationship, like power of attorney, are not useful ones for this particular
yeah,
one. But on the other
yeah,
hand, it may well include all we want, just have a few irrelevant ones. In terms of the genetic connection, while the genetic connection is what you want, I expect there'll be many cases where you don't actually have confidence in the genetic connection. Oh, it's an aunt. Well, was it an aunt by marriage or an aunt by blood? I don't know. And so, in terms of the
yeah,
data available to collect, it will often be a case if you don't actually know at the genetic level, you've just got the family connection level information, and
yeah,
that's got to be refined later on.
yeah, yeah. Because I think like pretty much the proposed value set is equivalent to the HSM International example set exactly. Um, but what it does, yeah, because I think this related person one, it adds in other specific relationships. So we've got a whole bunch of like um other kinds of legal and other kinds of relationship, which I don't think would ever be relevant for family member history. And even these more contact-based ones, which are, emergency contacts, employers, and other kinds of relationship. But yeah, like like but so these are all coming from the V2 sets for different kinds of relationships. Um, yeah, so
Sorry to
yeah,
interject here, Brett. Looking at the value set, a lot of the values like adopted children,
yeah,
adopted parents, etc.
yeah,
It depends on what are your use cases and
yeah,
what do you want to support. A lot of
yeah,
those are not necessarily relevant when you want to use
it
the family
depends.
member history to
Yeah,
do risk stratifications or assessment in terms of
yeah, that's
those
only
biologically related disease risks. So are we
yeah.
going to take an opportunity to clean it up, or are we just going to
I
say,
actually
look, we'll
I
take,
actually
we'll,
think they are relevant in things like social and psychological.
well, and type of relationships are relevant only when you're talking about psychological or behavioral conditions,
Yeah,
but they are
sure.
not relevant when you're talking about kind of biological related disease risk. So the question is, so
Yeah,
what are we looking at?
but I don't think we're just restricting it to biological. because
Okay.
because I think it's
And if we're not,
yeah,
we should use the wider set we've already put into related person relationship
yeah,
location.
but they're not family members.
That's a harsh
Yeah,
call. I feel like the concepts of like kinship carer and so forth could
maybe. Yeah,
potentially be considered if you're going to like social determinants of health and not a set of like biological things, then maybe they
yeah.
are
I think
wrong.
yeah,
Enduring
yeah,
power of
But
attorney and
employment
federal
and things like
government don't seem to be
yeah,
natural family relationships.
yeah.
exactly,
I think
and
there's a
employment
line.
relationships and stuff.
Yeah, I because I can certainly see like adoptive children, stepchildren, things like that. That's actually relevant, I think, to social and care provision. Yeah, your employer.
So could
I'm not
we,
sure it is. Yeah,
I think we're kind of all on the same page now. Um, so can we take an action for you, Brett, to assess the existing terminology and whether or not any of those out of the wider Australian set would
yeah,
also be appropriate for that purpose, and then come back
yeah.
um,
Cool.
for that.
Yeah, that's good. I think the set I've proposed is actually a good set. So I guess it would be more. Yeah, if there's other ones um that might might be relevant. Yeah, and I think yeah, your example was a good one. I think like a carer maybe that might be relevant. If they're
Certainly,
not
I
like
think
yeah,
I have agreed with people like the power of attorney, that's irrelevant to family member
yeah,
history. But we have added a code which is kinship carer, which supports
yeah,
First Nations. And I think that
yeah,
might
yeah,
be
yep.
relevant to what we're
That's
talking
good.
about.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's a good thing to investigate. Cool. That's good. Yeah. Any other things on the content of the value set? Not really. That's all right. Um, the other thing that we might consider is the binding strength. Um, in my draft, I've made it extensible, and this was mainly, I think, we don't do extensible very often in AE base. Um, we usually just have preferred bindings. Um, but I think too, like there is essentially some need to try and coerce um, people into using a standard set because it is limited and mappable in a lot of ways because there's not thousands of codes here. So it's one of it's actually quite possible, I think, to kind of require mapping. The Because the reason I went for that as well is we do have some precedents in AU base around in related person where we've replied this as an extensible binding in AU base, and we did have I think at the time a bit of a discussion about whether we would do that or not. Um, but that's kind of that is that broader set we look at of different relationships. But the idea was to try and get people to move towards having standardized terminology. So basically, if you're going to supply a term, you should supply a standard term. The Yeah. So I think that's essentially why I went in the draft to go as an extensible binding. So I guess that's up for debate as well in terms of what that is. Are there any comments on that question?
I'd like something clearly written, a clearly written policy thing on when we put extensible into AU-based profiles so that going forward we can, take new examples, test them against the state and policy, and then either allow them or reject them or adjust the policy. So I'd like that policy to be written in a place that's we can then refer to in situations like this.
That sounds fair. Danielle?
I like what Richard has said. I dispute that we can never get like clear, like super clear, like it's always black and white. That never happens.
Oh, no,
But
it won't always be, and I expect that
yeah.
every so often,
Yeah.
what we get out of it is a refinement of the statement.
So,
Yeah.
Brett, do you want to even navigate to the point in AU Base? In reflection of this, on the guidance, there was some work done in the last release that tried to document that we tend to
Oh,
go for preferred and that it's a case-by-case basis based on, oh, I don't remember the words we used. But that there was a set of words around like when we would increase the binding strength to extensible, which was something, if we don't haven't documented it yet, we should. But the tacit principle is that this is just there is
yeah.
such a wide set of implementation that it goes beyond preferred that we can actually put the strength back in a base instead of core for extensible to say that this is just how it is across Australia. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
And I kind of don't mind if we went for preferred, but then I think we should think about relaxing the related person one to preferred as well and let that get picked up in the downstream specs. So
can I just check? Because there's
yeah.
there's three resources, right? So patient, related person, and family member history are
Related person is
all
not,
codes
yeah.
from the same code system to express like biological mother or whatever else it is. And
Oh,
so I think that's where this is coming from.
yeah, family member history. Related person has the expanded value set, but a subset of that is the family member history relationship. Yeah.
Says NCTS is referenced in the related person.
It
Yes.
is.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's
it's
this one.
also in patient. Like patient also has a NCTS code system that is bound extensively in the patient resource. So I guess what
Uh,
we're trying to do is be
yeah.
really clear that these just are the codes. Every time you want to say biological mother, you use this code, whether it's the patient resource, related
Yeah.
person resource, or the family member history resource. That does make sense to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. So I think we would keep it consistent across the set, I think, because this is just another person relationship value set. So yeah. So I think, since the other ones are extensible, that's why I initially drafted it as extensible as well. Um, yeah, I think it's very helpful because that's a really, if you want to use it for decision support or anything really, you need to have a workable set because it will be otherwise impossible. Yeah, I'm fine to read, but not to drive any decision support if it's not known, a known set. Um, yeah, which is like
But
a big deal in AU base, I guess, because we don't normally do that.
yeah, I'm wondering why not just fix it in AU core? Why fix it in AU base?
Yeah,
Because
that's probably the question. Yeah, I could get on board with that because like there is the implementable AU core spec that would make it extensible. Yeah,
So
it's a
let
bit
me
of a
just
policy
double check a
principle
thing.
question. Yeah,
I know why. We started with patient, and of course, as we all know, when we're profiling, we can't relax the terminology binding. The patient value set for relationship is extensible. So we cannot undo that in AU base.
it's extensible in R4.
That's right. And so then we just
Oh,
proliferated to make it consistent across everything else we did where we were using the same value set. That's why we did it. I mean, we
right.
can revisit that, but we can't undo extensible in patient. It's always going to be extensible. related person, I think, had preferred, so we can choose to go back to preferred and then strengthen it in core, but
Yeah.
it does make sense to me
Yeah.
that if we're really clear that these are
Mm.
the codes that we're happy to implement, let's just let's just make it that way in base.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, at least it's consistent, right? So it should be using, like you would use the same codes to describe the contact relationship if they're, a family member or something, as you would for family member history or related person entry, which makes sense. I think you just keep it all aligned. Anyway, good one.
So,
So,
we have an action before we can approve around the terminology. Are there
yeah.
any other things that you were calling out around family member history resource in AU Base?
Yeah, the other binding I wanted to add was the clinical condition binding, which is essentially disease coding and
Mm-hmm.
that kind of binding.
Mm-hmm.
So that value set is oh yes, that's what I expect. So yeah, that's a health terminology set, um, which is basically disease codes. So let's have a look. Yeah, so that's all the condition
So it's just
coding.
down to like AU
Yeah,
core condition and AU base
yeah,
condition. Yep.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly,
Makes sense.
exactly. So that's all aligned. Yeah, so it's essentially the same SNOMED binding we have, yeah, for AU, yeah, for AU base,
Mm-hmm.
as a preferred binding. Um, so I'll just show that on here. Yeah, so food clinical conditions, that's actually the same value set. Um, so like in theory, if a patient had a condition, and they had a related person, you could add the family member related person with the same code, right? If you kind of follow that through. Um, yeah, so I think that one's a little less uh, controversial, let's say. I think that one's pretty clear that that's the right set. Go on, Dave.
So I must ask, the obvious gap for me is tying it into the other, like, who is the family member we're talking about? Um and
Yeah,
whether or not
that
there are
would be
any
must
extensions
supports.
available. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be must supports downstream, I think, because I don't want to say anything in eBase.
So, okay, let me
Yeah,
rephrase.
yeah,
As far as I know, there is one and only one way of linking the patient's family member history to the related person. There's a name element. That's it. It's just name.
yeah, yeah, and that yeah, that's an interesting element. I was having a look at the definition of that because it can be like unspecified kind of stuff, and it's really not a formal name in the sense like it's not a
It's a
it's not
string. It's not
It's
even
an
it's
alias.
not even a person name data
yeah,
type. It is
anything,
just a
yeah,
string. I
yeah,
I just I feel like this is also something that if we want to do family member history in Australia, we need to like maybe investigate that a bit more. Other extensions, what can we do about this?
yeah,
Because trying
yeah.
to link these
I
records
would.
together with that, oh,
Yeah,
that's
because this is more, yeah, the patient's history, right? This is actually the patient's record. And all you're doing is having a list of things. So if you actually want to link them, that's a different problem. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the thing. Because really you're just looking for, in some ways, it's not even important what their name is. You just want to know how they're related and what their problem is to do decision support. Um, so it's yeah, but if you want to actually go and identify someone, that's hard, that's harder, right? You're gonna if you want to find them. Um,
It's like an
yeah,
alias, really. It's just so
yeah,
mm.
maybe when you're updating it in the future and you're talking to the patient, they know who we're talking about.
yeah, exactly. So it's important that I know there's some aunt on my mother's side that does whatever, right? And so you can put that in, but you don't know their name or can't remember or whatever. And in some ways, that's less important than the actual problem and
Well,
the
it's interesting
relationship.
because if there are five aunts that you have, which aunt is that aunt? But
Doesn't
anyway,
matter. Doesn't
yeah,
matter unless you want to find the
well,
aunt. Yeah,
sure,
yeah,
the
yeah,
aunt, but there are
yeah.
five.
But
Um,
as a family history, like for your own personal record, I think that's why it's kind of think designed that way because it's like a allows incomplete linkage.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's fine to look at if you want to do that as a use case, like
Yeah.
downstream.
all right, I'm
But
gonna have to wrap it up.
yeah,
We've got two
yeah,
minutes left.
cool. Anyway, so I think all the rest of the stuff is really more about yeah, well, I think it's an AU core mission to say what should be in these records beyond that. But so, like, I think initially, like, I'd probably like to work on this to bring it through into AU Base as being at least the baseline terminology requirements. And then if it goes to AU core sometime in the future, you can look at the must supports and what is necessary in one of these records um, as well. So, yeah, that was my basic mission was to just look at those things. Um,
Okay. Are there any other
this,
questions? No,
yeah,
keep
this would
going,
this would be
please.
the stuff. Yeah, sorry, this would be the stuff that we're feeding to AU Core from CDI. So they've kind of put some things in scope that would be considerations for once that's kind of worked through in the AU CDI group publication side. That's it.
Okay, so there's an action on you, which is largely around actually the terminology. And then we would look to vote, I suppose, in the next FHIR Work Group meeting. Is that the plan?
Yeah,
All
yep.
right.
Let's aim for that. So yeah, I'll put some findings up in the on the agenda item for next time, and yep, and then we can have a chat and hopefully go through to a draft.
Okay. Besides what we've already talked about around the firework group and also like around, sorry, the firework group, the family member history, and also moving through the three jurors from Heath, um, and potentially the PSS from Uday. Are there any other items that we want to add to our next meeting agenda? I'm not hearing any. You can email us at any time. And by us, I mean the firework group co-chairs if you would like to add something. All right. Shall we leave it there? Perfect. Thank you,
Yes,
everybody.
Thanks.
We are at time.
Thanks, Danielle.
Hang
thanks,
out.
Daniel.
Thanks,
Thank
Daniel.
you. Bye.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody.